a successful score is a score that you actually don't notice. It's a score that enhances the story without it being palpable or like very noticeable. If you're watching a film and you go like, oh my God, here's a score, I hear music, then that took away your attention from where your attention should have been, which is the actual story happening on screen.
Welcome to a special episode of the QuarterTones podcast. My name is Mikey Mhenna. Today on the series, I'm so lucky to have Suad Bushnaq on the series, who is a composer and scores so many films, is a musician based in Toronto, but has drawn influences from all over the world. Suad, welcome to the series.
Thank you, Mikey. I'm excited to be here.
So maybe let's just take a moment to put in perspective what it actually means to be a film scorer and what is different from that job, from the reality of that job compared to what you thought it was when you were maybe 15?
Good question. I would say maybe also when I was 25, not just 15, because when I was 15, I knew that I wanted to be a composer. That was like, it was a done deal. I was a nerd at school. I was a straight A student, but my true passion was music. And I decided to become a composer then. And film music was definitely something that I wanted to do. I was inspired by film scores. However, I went to university to study music composition on an academic level at McGill University in Montreal that does not really teach you film music. They teach music composition, avant-garde composing, music for concert, which in and of itself was an amazing experience. But it didn't really prepare me for the working world in the film music industry, because they're extremely different. So I thought that I would go and, with my music talent and just like do whatever I want and write music as complex as I want, and it would make its way into a film or a series. And that was it. And it was only after working on my first and second films, which actually coincided with each other, that I learned that it's much more of a craft than an art, in the sense that you're tailoring something. It's as if you're a tailor and someone tells you, I want, a suit or a dress that looks like that fits me properly. And your job is to answer to that client's request. Of course, you bring your expertise as a composer, but also you're not just exercising your artist ego in saying, no, this is what I want to do. It has to be functional art. It has to be what the director of the film or the producer of the show wants.
Yeah.
So that was a learning curve for me. That took a few films before I kind of and a lot of advice from my fellow composers in the industry here in Canada, after it kind of clicked that, it's not about you. It's about the show or the film.
When you watched films growing up, I think we're about the same age. When you watched films growing up, were you aware of certain scores? Did you have favorite scores? Were you like a John Williams, Hans Zimmer, addict? Did you listen to those Yusuf Shaheen films and you're obsessed with those scores? Or were you just I like music, I like Bach?
I was more of an I like music person. I was obsessed with Bach. I still am to today. I even wrote a suite called Sindi Bach for the Canadian Arabic Orchestra that explores what Bach would have done in the Arab world. He went on a tour with Sinbad, but that's a story for another day.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was more of a music person. I didn't really obsess over specific film scores. And to be honest, Hollywood film scores for me weren't a huge deal. I was listening more to Marcel Khalifa and Omar Khayrat when I was 16, and Chopin's Piano Concerto No. 1 and Rachmaninoff, than I was to film scores. And maybe part of that is because growing up in Amman in the 80s and 90s, we didn't really have a lot of access to these albums. But I saw, for example, Titanic in the cinema and was amazed by the score. I saw Home Alone 1 and 2, and the score of those two films until this day is a big one. So during my childhood, these were the influences. But yeah, it was mainly just music and world music also, like Greek music, Balkan music, that inspired me. But there was a specific film score in university that's at McGill that was like, okay, I'm going to become a film composer.
Yeah.
Hands down.
What was it?
And that was Gabriel Yared's score for The Talented Mr. Ripley. So during my degree at McGill, I took a film music course as an elective. It was offered as an elective. It wasn't part of the whole degree. And we had to analyze the score for The Talented Mr. Ripley and write a 10-page paper, like I don't know how many thousand words at the time. And that was a turning point for me during my university years, where I was like, okay, this is brilliant work, number one. Like, it's brilliant. And the way he combined Baroque influences with mystery, with other influences, just blew me away. And I knew that that once I graduate, I want to go into film for sure.
It's interesting because, like, you know, internally within afikra, we've been having this like ongoing conversation around the difference between art and performance. And what, like, as somebody who masters their craft, and their craft is artistic, obviously, how does it feel to have to serve a broader vision, or have to work with a director and have to work with a script that clearly you're not going to change, and have to work with characters that you don't have control over, and have to think about, okay, how do I actually use my craft to serve this broader vision? How does that actually work? Like, kind of walk me through that.
So the way I learned it works is by changing my mindset when I approach the project, or when the project approaches me.
Yeah.
So instead of, first of all, I'm at a point in my life now where I don't just write music for the sake of writing music. I just don't write music for pleasure, basically. I write it either because I have a commission or I have a film. But the way with film is that, as I said earlier, like, you kind of have to keep your ego aside and deal as a business, in the very good sense of what the word business entails, that this director or this producer are coming to me, they're entrusting me with a film that they worked years on. You know, it takes a film director, like if you're talking about a film that's going to a film festival, this is years worth of work for that director. And in many cases, they're approaching you at the very end of that process in post-production, when they've shot the film, they're now, you know, going into coloring and just packaging it for the festival. And that level of trust in and of itself is one thing that I never take for granted. Like, I'm being given a trust that I need to handle with care, and a lot of tender, loving care, and making sure that the captain of this ship is happy with what I give them. So it's a lot of conversations, and you approach the project as someone who is going to infuse their talent and their experience, because also on the flip side, yes, the director took years to reach this point and have a film that's been shot and edited and ready to be scored. But on the flip side, by the time the director has done that, which could be, for example, 3-4 years, sometimes longer, I've already scored tens of, or maybe not tens, but like per year, I'm scoring about 7 to 10 projects. So my turnaround is faster, right? Because my project duration is 2 months, 1 month, sometimes 3 weeks, depends. So I bring that accumulated experience, which now 10 years into the industry has been a very long experience. And I can almost predict what is required for the project, but I don't project those predictions on the director. I hear from them first what they're looking for. And if they ask me for my opinion, of course, I give it. And in many cases, they appreciate that. Like, if something will not work, or if something will make the scene less impactful. I'm the type of composer who has no problem telling a director, I don't think this scene needs music, because music is a layer. Film music, as opposed to what I write for concerts, is very different. I'm just a layer in a multi-layered lasagna, if you would, or any kind of layered thing. You know, you have the picture, you have the dialogue, you have the sound effects, and then music comes to fill in whatever those three elements are not telling you. And the last thing you want is overscoring and ending in something melodramatic that really dictates what the audience wants. So I come with those things in mind, that the director or producer's opinion and vision really matter. They always have to have a vision. I cannot tell a director or producer what their vision is. My job is to bring their vision to life. And we talk about emotions usually. That's the conversation. What do you want the audience to feel when they watch your film? Also, one thing I always do is, and they appreciate that a lot, because by the time they get to that step in their filmmaking, it's a nice reminder for them, but it also serves me when I ask them, can you please give me 5 to 7 words or short phrases that describe the emotional arc you want your audience to feel once they've left the film? And it's like a little capsule of what that film is about.
So let me ask you a question. Okay, you're sitting outside the premiere of a film that you've worked on, okay? And you're listening to people walk out the door, okay? And you hear those 5 to 7 words over and over again. Oh my God, unnerving, disconcerting, terrifying, whatever words that you want to, comforting, lovely, so warm, made me feel at home, like whatever phrases you want to hear. However, every single person walks out saying, I didn't really notice the music though. Does that feel good, or is that like, ugh, ya Allah?
That's an excellent question. Actually, I was in Cairo at the end of January this year for the premiere of Rihle 404, Flight 404, by Hani Khalifa is the director and Muna Zaki is the main protagonist. And I was like on guard, like, what will I hear people say? Mm-hmm. And people loved the film. But no one came up to me except maybe like 3 people to tell me the music was amazing, including Muna Zaki. But I was like, inside of me, I was hoping people would like kind of come to me and be like, Suad, the score, oh my God. But I knew beforehand that, and I've known all my life, not all my life, I've known halfway through my working life that a successful score is a score that you actually don't notice. It's a score that enhances the story of the film without it being palpable or like very noticeable. If you're watching a film and you go like, oh my God, here's a score, I hear music, then that took away your attention from where your attention should have been, which is the actual story happening on screen. And there are places in films where a composer can have that sort of playground, like in montages, for example, Up, the animated Pixar
the
film.
Iconic
montage. Yeah, the iconic montage of his wife. Like there's no dialogue really. And montages are playgrounds for composers. You can have your masterpiece there and people will notice that. But as long as you have dialogue and action happening, that's not always the case. And it also depends on the film. So for me, during Flight 404, Rihle 404, it's the after wave that kind of people's reactions. And then film critics going in and explaining in their critiques how the score really enhanced without taking over, and how also the directing enhanced the story without taking over. That kind of made me realize that I've been successful in that attempt, and also the director being happy. But I think our little artist ego always pops up, and you kind of have to quiet it. Like, it's not about you, Saad. It's about the film. The film was a success because of the editing, because of the music, because of the directing, the acting. It's teamwork. And it's always a good reminder to remember that.
So I want to play a little bit of your show reel because it goes through a couple of these films, including Arba Arba. And then I want to talk a little bit about them. So I'm going to stop here for a second because I want to contrast briefly the difference between, for example, Arba'miya Arba and Crashing Eid and Basma, which for me, obviously the content is different. One is a very heavy, intense, tragic story. And then there's these two more playful things. But for example, like in Basma, this na 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 thing, I'm curious where that idea came from, and if it's something that's like through a conversation with you and Fatima. Are you guys talking and saying, oh, we need this thing?
Yeah, totally. So one thing about working with Fatima al-Banawi is that she really knew what she wanted, and she gave me enough guidance, but also enough freedom to do that. She told me, I want the score to be floaty and bubbly, and I definitely hear vocals. And she gave me, I can't remember anymore, but she gave me a reference where there were some sort of vocals that, without any lyrics, but some sort of vocal element. But at the same time, Basma, the film, it has two underlying arcs. Like there's the playful Basma, who's very optimistic about life. And then there's her father's mental illness, which creeps in. So we had to play with those two ideas in two musical worlds that collide and that are part of the same family, but also that are distinctively their own characters. So definitely a conversation. And that's one thing I love about writing for film, is that this idea of the score would have never come to my mind had I not had that conversation with Fatima or a director of another show, because I'm a strong believer in the idea that ideas only are born when two people start to talk, not one person. I find it difficult to believe that one person can come up with an idea, but it's when two or more people start to talk, that's where ideas start to, be born and flourish.
So let's go to the Crashing Eid piece. To me, when I hear that, my ear hears Greece and Balkans and that type of energy. Am I misplacing that?
No, you're right. Spot on. And when you listen to the entire score, you will also notice a bit of Rahbanis and 70s Lebanon in it. Yeah. And that was also a conversation that I had with the writer of the show, Noura Abu Shosha, who's also the executive producer. And it was with Noura, the way we worked is that first I did my own thing, and then we had to have the conversation when what I did was really off. Like I went really in a very experimental direction at first, and then we had a conversation, and she said, let's think of like 70s, 80s Lebanon meets Greek, Balkan, klezmer, and make it comedic and also with the dramedy aspect. And that was my roadmap. But then I had to make it me, right? Because also like you want the director or producer to get what they want, but you also want it to reflect your own artistic voice, Yeah. And we reached that medium, and then I had to add the comedic aspects that make it a little heightened reality farce, to add the farce elements to it. But definitely, again, it was a conversation that enabled this score to be born.
I want to go a little further back and talk about one of your earlier pieces. It's not that far back, but a very important appointment. So I want to just share my screen again, and then I'd love to hear a little bit of the backstory. So maybe I'll play it first, and then you can tell us a little bit about the backstory here.
Audrey has a very important appointment this morning. It's one that she has been eagerly anticipating for a long, long time. You see, Audrey was born to sleep. In fact, if sleeping were a sport, Audrey would be a gold medalist.
Hey, Audrey, it's me. I'm so sorry about last night. It can't end like this. Please call me back.
Audrey Stackhouse, how are ya? Do you mind signing right there? Yeah. Great. Yeah. Okay. Oh, perfect. Have a nice day.
Oh, hello.
Audrey, devi pagare l'affitto.
Miss Milano, yeah, I'm so sorry, but I really have to go. I've got this terrible cold. I'll have it to you by Friday. Monday.
Non prendere scuse!
Hello?
Audrey, it's Mom. I heard about what happened. You know, before your father and I got
Yeah.
married, we broke up
Yes,
several
Mom.
times.
Okay, I'm gonna stop here.
So sorry, but I'm actually really running.
So maybe tell us a little backstory on how you got involved with this project, and what it was like working on it.
Okay, so this project is very special for several reasons. The first is that this was the first time in my life as a composer where I got to be the showrunner. This was my graduation project from the Canadian Film Centre here in Toronto, and they give every composer the opportunity, a golden opportunity, to basically get a director and a scriptwriter and an editor and actors to act out their dream project. So basically, I had to tell them that my dream is to compose music for a heightened reality show or film, similar in style to what Wes Anderson does, you know, popping colors, the central, all that. And they made it happen. And basically, I had a say in everything in that film, what the directing was like, what the actors, who the actors were, where, I can't talk anymore, who the actors were,
Yeah.
and what they wore, everything. And composers, we never get to do this.
Yeah.
This never happens. A director gets to do this, but not composers. So that was the cool thing about this project. And for me, it ended up becoming my calling card. You know, like this is my carte de visite for any incoming director. And I loved scoring it. But also what I love about it, and it's got the score got a nomination at the Hollywood Music and Media Awards, which was a very nice surprise as well. But what I love about that film is that because of it, I ended up scoring years later, Crashing Eid. And I'm going to tell you how that happened.
Yeah.
I had that little film, which my friend, Palestinian film director Saeed Zaga, saw. And I ended up scoring his short film, Dayf Min Dahab, Lovesick in the West Bank, which had a similar kind of farce comedy aspect to it. And a few years after that, Saeed got the opportunity to direct 2 episodes of Crashing Eid. So he recommended me to the writer and producer. And they asked me to pitch. And part of the pitch was this video. for me, I love it because on the one hand, it's my true identity in scoring. Like I discovered after that apparently I have a knack for scoring comedies and dramedies, which I never knew was the case. And I ended up landing more comedy work after that. But I love the fact that it shows you where you started as a composer, you know, like you do this one little thing that you put all your heart and soul into. And then it opens up other doors for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The first question that occurred to me when I started watching this, and this is going to sound like a really, really simple question, but I'm really curious. When you have such like a carte blanche with everything on this project, how do you choose the key?
The key of the...
Yeah.
You know, I think because I'm a pianist by training, usually my hands always go to like C major because that's the easiest thing on the keyboard. But then you learn that's part of color in music is changing keys. So it became a habit for me not to always start on C major or A minor, like to try other keys as well. And to be honest, because I haven't played in a while, it became harder and harder. Like I'm out of practice, you know, my fingers are rusty. So it became an intentional thing where I first start scoring with the key that's easiest for me to play in, but then I intentionally change keys during the scoring process. And there are two things that affect that. The register of the voice of the actors talking plays a big role in that because I treat them as soloists. If my actor has a very high-pitched voice, first of all, my key needs to be in a lower register, but also the type of key will affect how the sound waves, you know, clash or not. For sure. So that's, But also I became more and more interested in knowing what the significance of keys are. So for example, G minor, war, F major is... Yeah, there are characteristics to specific keys. E minor, for example, I think is melancholy or something like that. I don't have them memorized. But
wait, hold on. So
keys...
G minor is war. Is B flat major also war?
I would
just
doubt
a different mode.
Unless they're really winning.
Winning
it's
the
relative,
war, losing the war. Relative minor, relative major.
Apparently there are these characteristics which... I'm pretty sure they didn't come from nowhere. Like, I'm pretty sure there's a very good reason why they exist. I don't follow them religiously, obviously. Sometimes you have to change keys just because, for example, in the chase scene in this, in a very important appointment, which we just saw, there's a chase scene, and it was my mentor who told me at the time, and then it became a habit for me. He told me halfway through the chase, when you're repeating the same melody, change it will heighten the action. And that's exactly what it did. You know, it just a shift of a key makes you feel you're hearing something new, even though it's a repetition, but it intensifies the action.
Amazing. Okay. I want to watch another clip. And this is the David Attenborough. You had the opportunity to score Secret World of Sound with David Attenborough. So we'll listen to a little bit and then we'll go from there.
The natural world is filled with sound. But so far, we've been hearing only part of it. Some animals call even before they enter the world. Others use sound to communicate with their siblings. Or call to their parents. Using the most advanced audio technology, we can listen to them all. To reveal how baby animals use sound to stay alive, in a world where the odds are stacked against them. The most perilous time in an animal's life is at its very beginning.
So, Suad, I'm just curious. As I play this, I'm curious. What are you given?
So I'm always given the picture with the narration and the sound.
Is it the final? It's the final actual recorded narration, or it's a script?
Oh, it's a script. So, for example, this scene in particular, the swans, doesn't reflect what I got throughout the series because this scene is one of the few scenes in the series where Sir David Attenborough is on screen. So he's talking on screen, right?
Yeah.
The narration parts, I actually never got to hear his final narration until the series was released. I was scoring to narration done by a temp, so done by someone else. That changed throughout my... That's not just the narration changed, the picture changed. So I'm not also given a final... In this case, I was not given a final or what we call a picture lock. I was given a work in progress that I started scoring, and then they would change the picture and I would have to change my score accordingly. I worked hand in hand with the producers, and I had 3 different directors to work with, one for each episode, until we reached the final results of what you see today on screen.
So in a project like this, where you know it's a global audience, has nothing to do with the Arab world whatsoever, are you intentionally stripping away certain maybe natural references that you have from your sort of musical DNA and trying to speak in kind of a globalized voice?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So actually with this project, first of all, the pitching process on this project was at least 1.5 years, if not 2 years. My agent, my Canadian agent, suggested my name along with 1 or 2 other composers as potential composers who can score it. And it took several auditions to get shortlisted as one of 2 composers who might end up scoring it. And one of the concerns that were there, that most of what I've written so far sounds Middle Eastern, more or less.
Yeah.
First of all, I owe my agent, my Canadian agent, Trish Klein, a big one, because she knew that my musical training actually is Western classical. Yani, if you ask me now about maqamat or whatever, I'm the last person who can answer you about that. Yeah. I didn't really learn Middle Eastern music. It's just what I hear. So she had a lot of faith in me. And because my repertoire didn't really reflect that Western classical education, I ended up composing new music for the pitch. So more orchestral things that sounded more natural history oriented, nothing Middle Eastern in there. I had to strip it down. And I had conversations with the Canadian producer of that series, because it was a Canadian-British production, with whom I've met here in Toronto. And he told me, if you can please come up with things like, I really love your music. I think you're the right person for it, but we do need to convince the other producers in Bristol that you are not just a Middle Eastern person when it comes to your compositions. So it was their faith, both of them, the Canadian producer and my agent, and then me working on these non-Middle Eastern sounding things that landed me the project.
Yeah. When you speak to young kids who are interested in this type of stuff, let's say kids that, maybe I should ask you, let me ask you a little bit about your training and then I'll ask you this question. So I know that you studied at the Conservatory in Damascus, so I'm curious about that process. Maybe describe that conservatory. What did you actually learn? There are so many amazing artists, theater people, musicians, actors, dancers that come out of Damascus. Like, please describe what that conservatory and sort of environment, creative environment was like and what it might be like now. I don't know how connected you are still to folks there.
Yeah. I just recorded the score for Basma, actually, is colleagues of mine from the Conservatory in Damascus, which amazing. Exactly. I've kept in touch with them. We record with each other, even though it's been 20 years now. But yeah, I went to Damascus when I was 18. And I had just come from Amman, where we had the National Music Conservatory, which is a much smaller conservatory. And the number of musicians in Amman is considerably smaller, at the time at least, than it was in Damascus. And I remember the Syrian orchestra came to Amman for a concert just before I moved to Damascus. And we were all blown away by the level of music they played. So here's the thing that I laugh about now. It's funny when you remember things you did when you were 18 and how you thought you were like the center of the world. And then you discover that you're like a nobody. I remember going to my audition at the Higher Institute of Music in Damascus. I had one piece prepared, like one piano piece. It was Beethoven's Tempest Sonata. And I had the music with me too, like it wasn't memorized. And then I walk into this huge ballet room with like mirrors all over it. And there's a jury of like 15 people. And behind them, there's an audience. It was the most, I don't want to say traumatizing, but intimidating thing I've seen in my life. And I walk in and there's like 20 other students behind the door waiting for their audition. So I went in and it was Ustad Solhi al-Wadi, Allah yarhamu, he's the dean and founder of that conservatory, who passed away years ago. He was sitting there and I played that piece. And I mean, my level probably wasn't that amazing. I was good. I was a strong pianist, but there were many strong pianists there. And he asked me, he's like, you're strong, but would you be willing to major in organ instead of piano? Because a lot of students apply for piano, obviously. That's what I learned later. And like with the zero, with snobbishness, I'm like, I didn't come all the way from Amman to Damascus to major on organ. That's what I told him. And when the Syrian students outside learned of what I told him, they were like, are you out of your mind? If he tells you play Derbekke, you say yes, you get in, and then you change your major. But that was the level of superiority I had back then. And then like after that audition, I went out and I discovered that like this pianist, this is their third year trying to audition and they still didn't get in. So I noticed that, okay, this is a big deal. Luckily, and I don't know how, miraculously, he agreed to Ustad Solhi agreed to accept me in the piano degree. But once I saw the level, the caliber of musicians around me, I was practicing 11 hours a day. I was like sitting at I rented a piano from Beiruti, لتأجير البيانو in Damascus. They rent you pianos. And I had one in my apartment for my entire duration there. And I was an 8 to 11 hours practice a day kind of person until I reached that level where I'm now like, okay, I can memorize 30 minutes of music and do an exam and get the high grades and all that. So it was a humbling experience for me because I realized I'm not the only pianist out there. There are many. And many of these musicians were like double majoring in medicine at the University of Damascus. Like fantastic pianist who can like whip a piano concerto with her eyes closed, but she's also a pharmacist. You know, like that kind of thing is what I got exposed to. And in all honesty, I mean, I'm grateful for the life I've been given so far during my years of existence on this earth. Every day is a blessing, but in all honesty, those 4 years I spent there were life-changing. And until now, I look back at them as like the best 4 years of my life. And I love that I'm still in contact with everyone there.
What do you think is so special about what they were doing, like educationally, pedagogically? Like what was so special about the institution that prepared so many people to be so passionate and so excellent at their crafts?
It was it was a business is business kind of thing. Like you couldn't get away with slacking off. As simple as that. We had Ukrainian and Russian teachers who had an interpreter right next to them. Like I remember my music theory class. She was a Russian teacher who would speak in Russian. The interpreter, the Syrian interpreter next to her would interpret in Arabic. Then we would ask him questions in Arabic. And this was how it's done. Or we had also, for example, Viktor Babenko, my choir teacher, and he also taught other subjects, Ukrainian. He spoke Arabic. He spoke to us in broken Arabic. But like, you come 1 minute late to a class, you're not getting in. It was cutthroat, really. And for some people don't like that. I mean, now I compare it to North America, for example. When I tried to teach piano in that cutthroat mentality, it wasn't taken well. You know, here we kind of want, you know, a trophy for everyone. Try to practice. It'll, you know, you'll get it when you get it, that sort of thing. But I took a piano lesson with one of their most tough piano teachers at the time at the Conservatory. Vladimir Zaretsky, for example. He shut the piano on my fingers while I was playing to show me how I was wasting too much energy by lifting my hand up too much. So like, he literally shut the piano, and then he went on the floor and held my foot to the pedal to show me how to pedal properly. These teachers studied hand and arm anatomy while they studied music to become teachers. So it was that level. And honestly, like, I when I talk with my colleagues and who are now very close friends from back then, we always say we lived through the golden age of that conservatory. These were days that never kind of repeated themselves. You know, you have the war that started after, but also before that, it was still kind of building. And we really lived in that little period of time where things were really flourishing.
So how many of the professors and instructors were from Eastern Europe? Was it mostly from Eastern Europe?
Half, I would say. Well, the ones who were teaching the Western instruments, most stuff. Yeah. Yes. Mostly from Eastern Europe. Yes, we didn't have like American teachers, for example.
Were you also exposed to teachers from Iraq and Syria? Obviously, there was also.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, of course. So Ustaz Ra'ad Khalaf, violin, was Iraqi. Ustaz Solhi al-Wadi himself is originally Iraqi. We had Ustaz Askar Ali Akbar for Oud, who was from Azerbaijan, and his wife was the Qanun teacher from Azerbaijan. So yeah, it was. And in terms of students, though, it was me, and there was another Jordanian, Fadi Hattar, cello, and there was a Tunisian student, but the majority of the student body was Syrian.
Amazing.
So we were like the foreigners.
Yeah.
Which was kind of cute in a way.
So if we go back to that point, I'm curious who some of your, as you were sitting, I'm just imagining you like on your 9th hour practicing in your apartment, right? Fingers bruised from the day before when your instructor shuts the thing on your fingers. Who were some of your inspirations in terms of performers or in terms of composers at that moment? Were you thinking, oh, I love listening to this person, I want to play like them, or I want to write like them, or I want to, what did you want to be?
Yeah. So one story that really comes to my mind when you ask that question is how I was, at that time, I started writing piano pieces, okay? So I would write something and it was by like pencil and paper on the piano. There were no computers back then. I'm not that old, but you know, we didn't have like laptops with us or that sort of stuff. And I would go to the conservatory, and I had a bunch of friends who were also composers at the time. Cellist friend Sohaib al-Samman, Mayas al-Yamani, violinist. And we would have like these little gatherings where we would play each other's compositions for each other, right? And we would critique each other, and it was really nice. And I remember one time I composed a piece. It was an improvisation, but I actually wrote it down and ended up recording it. And it had a bit of Baroque in it, but also a bit of jazz, a little bit of jazz. And I'm not a jazzist, but it had those chords that make it sound a little jazzy. And my friend Mayas was there, and he was like, have you ever listened to Aziza Mustafazada? And I'm like, who's that? He goes like, you need to listen to her because your piece sounds a lot like what she writes. And I had never heard of her before. So he gave me a cassette tape the following day. And I listened to it back, you know, both sides. And I started bawling because of, first of all, how beautiful her music was. And second of all, because my ego was so bruised that I thought I was doing something original. And again, like, that's me. I'm 19 years old. You know, you think you're like a big deal, big shot. And I couldn't believe how beautiful her music was. And I'm like, how did she think of that before me? And that comes from a competitive thing that I have. And then I remember inviting my friends to my apartment, or maybe it was my best friend's apartment, and I had to sit them down and force them to listen to her entire album. Well, I was like just in awe of what she did, but also kind of like, yeah, my ego was bruised, but I was like, okay, I need to up my game. Suad, you need to up your game. Like, someone already did that. What will you do? So that for me, Aziza Mustafa Zada, until now, if I listen to her, memories of Damascus come back.
Amazing.
But also Bach Brandenburg concertos were a thing for me back then. And until now, if I play any one of those, the Brandenburg concertos, I go back to a rainy afternoon in Damascus, like clockwork. Like that's the only memory that comes to mind.
Amazing.
So yeah, it was this kind of, and also my peers. I was really inspired by my peers. Like there were a couple pianists there that were so awe-inspiring. And at a certain point in my piano education, I knew that I'm not that good of a pianist. And I have major stage fright, by the way, until today. And that's kind of is what made me become a composer. Knowing that, okay, I'm not cut for this, play on stage. Because I used to get super sick before my piano exams out of nerves. And I kind of like found myself like, okay, you're not cut to be a performer. Look at her, look at him. They're made for it. They become the king of the stage or the queen of the stage. And I found myself through composition that way.
So the question I wanted to ask you earlier was, what advice would you give to 15-year-old Suad, who's 24 years old now, like who's in 2024, excuse me. So if you are talking to a classroom of 15-year-olds, some of whom who are shy, some of whom who have arrogance and hubris for days, some of whom think they know the world, some of whom are intimidated by every corner of the universe that they don't understand, like, what would you tell them if they were interested in pursuing a career in music?
Difficult question. It's an excellent question, but it's a difficult question because on the one hand, you don't want to tell a 15-year-old be humble. I think my arrogance at the time was important. It helped me get to where I wanted to get. If I was too humble or too scared, I wouldn't have even made it to that first audition, for example, right? At the same time, you cannot be arrogant in this industry at all. It's a balance. I think it's a balance between knowing who you are and knowing how to get to where you want to get. So my advice would be as simple as be present where you are now, but make one thing your focus and let everything in your life serve that focus or that purpose until you get there. Because it takes a lot of dedication. I mean, I get young composers, like 20-year-old composer who's like, I can't get any paid work, you know. I'm like, well, guess what? How many free films did I score before I got a paid job? Like, you need to build a repertoire, and you cannot do that by just expecting people to pay you for your talents. So I would say advice, make your career your focus and see how you can serve that focus without letting your ego come in the way. Yeah. That's the best advice I can give.
Amazing. Okay. The last question I want to ask you, I'm going to put you on the spot. And if you think about it afterwards, you can add more to the list and we'll put them up on Daftar, our magazine. I'm curious, you mentioned a few films already, but for you, and let's maybe focus on films that have come out of the Arab world, if possible. What do you think are some of the best scored films in the history of film in the region? And it can be stuff that's very old. It can be some of, if you want to add your films, it can be stuff that some of your contemporaries have created.
I recently watched Hajjan.
Great.
And it was scored by Amin Bouhafa, who's a contemporary and a colleague. And that's, the score blew me away. So did the film. And for me, it was one of these cases where I'm watching a film and I'm like, this is a composer's dream. You know, you have the vast desert scenes, the traditional melody that he got to kind of explode into a bigger orchestral format. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful experience visually and on an auditory level. So I think that's one of the best to come out.
Amazing.
From our region.
Any others come to mind? Any older ones or stuff that when you started really doing all those free scores on your own, right? That you were like, oh man, this is really great from the 70s or from the 80s or from the 90s, or like anything that you pulled influence from?
Not from our region in particular, but for example, Eternity and a Day, Eleni Karandro. Am I pronouncing her name right? I always mix up her last name. She's a very famous Greek composer.
Yeah, sure.
That's a score to keep in mind forever. Anything Ennio Morricone wrote, like Cinema Paradiso. These are like masterpieces that you always get inspired by because they kind of set the tone. They give you a new roadmap almost. And then you see all composers kind of doing something more or less similar.
Yeah. Have you revisited some of your older stuff and thought to yourself, Ya Allah, I wish I did that differently. Like, I wish I could have that. I wish I could have that one back to redo.
Totally. Yeah. Yes. So on the one hand, you go back and you say, I wish I had done it differently. And then on the other hand, you tell yourself, if I do have the time in the future, I will go back and do this differently. So if it's like, especially if it's not attached to a film, if it's just like an orchestral piece or something, sometimes it's nice to go back and revisit a work and let it mature. But on the other hand, that's also who you were back then. So like, especially with film scores, that's who I was in 2015 when I scored that film. And that's a time capsule for me of who I was.
Sure.
I learned from that, but I cannot change it. But it's got me to where I am right now.
Amazing.
So yeah, you kind of have those regrets sometimes, but because you know there's no time to go fix them, you kind of just learn, okay, next time I'm not going to do that. I'll do it differently.
Okay, before we wrap up, I want to play a little bit of The Borrowed Dress. This is on YouTube. It's being performed by the Syrian Expat Philharmonic Orchestra and Manfred Lecter. Is that how you say that?
It's Leuchter.
Leuchter. Okay, let's play a little bit of this.
I should mention, Mikey, sorry, one thing about film scores from the region that inspired me. I would be, I would regret not saying this now that I remembered it. Omar Khairat's score for Damir Abla Hikmat. I don't know if you remember. That's a show from the early 80s. No. And the score was so significant and so impactful that it stayed with me forever. So Omar Khairat was a big one for me.
Amazing.
From that period.
Okay. And if any more come to mind, we're going to turn this into a Daftar article. So we'll leave it in the comments. So let's play a little bit of this. So tell us when this was commissioned and sort of the backstory of this piece.
So the backstory of this piece is that this is a concert version of what is in fact a score for a documentary called The Borrowed Guest. And it was a weird turn of events. I scored a documentary called The Borrowed Dress by Lean Al-Faisal, who was a young Syrian director. And a month after I was done with that, I got a call from Ra'ed Jazbe, the founder of the Syrian Expat Philharmonic Orchestra, saying they're going to have a concert in Berlin in a few months. They had already played one of my pieces the year prior to that. And I told him, you know what? I think I have an idea for a new piece. So I called Lean and I told her, you know that last theme in your film and the theme before it, I feel that they could really be blown up for full orchestra, and they would sound really nice. Would you allow me to do that even though the film has not been released yet? And she said, yeah, sure. Where's the concert going to be? I told her it's going to be in Berlin. So the documentary, The Borrowed Dress, that Lean did is about her family who's scattered across Europe because of the war in Syria and whom she hadn't seen in like many years. I end up rearranging this music for full orchestra. Of course, the version you hear in the concert version is way more elaborate than what was in the film. And then the orchestra sends Lean an invitation to come to attend the premiere of this piece in Berlin. And we didn't know if she can make it or not, if she can get a visa to come to Europe as a Syrian citizen or not. And in a very strange turn of events, she ends up getting a visa to come visit Europe, comes to the premiere of the music of her film, which hasn't been released yet, but ends up seeing all her cousins about whom she made the film, whom she hadn't seen in many years.
You're kidding
So
me.
like, it's magic, pure magic. You can't make that stuff up. And she was in tears at the concert. And that's how it happened. And
Wow.
now this piece has taken a life of its own. It was played by the Cincinnati Chamber Orchestra when, Amal, the big...
Of course, yeah.
They welcomed her on playing this music in Cincinnati a few months ago. And it was performed many other places around the world. So it took a life of its own. But that little story there, that was also my first time meeting Lean, which was a nice way to meet her.
Beautiful. So people can find you, well, first of all, they can go to your website, suadbushnaq.com. They can find you on social media. Is there anything coming out in the next few months that you think people should know about?
Yes, there is an album that was funded by AFAQ, actually, the Arab Fund for Arts and Culture, called The Edge of Life, Soundtracks from Arab Cinema, which has scores that I did for smaller films that never really ended up having a full album release on their own. And this should come out at the end of the summer.
Cool.
Look out for that. And I'm currently scoring The Exchange series for Netflix, season 2. And a beautiful, gorgeous film by a Syrian filmmaker from the Golan Heights, Amir Fakhreddin, his film called Yunan, which is a masterpiece, in my opinion. Now we're in the final stages of producing the music.
Wow. يعطيك العافية.
Allah yafik.
Suad, thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me, Mikey, and for the amazing questions.